So welcome to another Wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at a game from Legion Wargames. And this is Demyansk Shield. And it's the Frozen Fortress. And this is a...
It's fun.
Yeah, it's an East Front game, but it's a specific campaign within the East Front. And it's January through May 1942. And it's designed by Vance von Bares. And there's an interview with him about this game on theplayersaid.com, so check that out if you want to learn a bit more about kind of the design of the game and how he went about creating this. We just played this for the first time. We just sat down for a few hours and played this, at least as much of it as we could.
Yep.
It's very, very late. And it's most of the units are a brigade. It's kind of a brigade level, so it's an operational game. And basically what it revolves around is it's Army Group North for the Germans, and it was during their advance on Leningrad, a large portion of them got cut off around Demyansk. There was a large Russian counterattack, and they cut off a huge, 80,000 German soldiers were trapped. And so this game, it's about making that happen. The Russians creating that pocket, and then the Germans trying to relieve those trapped forces so they don't get completely crushed. From a production standpoint, I really enjoyed the game. I thought the map was very clear, very clean, and I think the counters are very clear. I really like the look of the counters on these. They're not too small. The font on those is large.
And they're clean as well.
Yeah.
Not a lot of information. And they're nice to look at.
Yeah, so it feels good to have it on the table. There's and we'll show you here in a bit. There's some unit stacking. Typically we have very few single units in hexes. It's usually 2 or 3.
And those units are typically waiting in support.
Yeah.
To either counterattack or fill openings or holes.
So it was definitely break out the tweezers for this one.
Yeah.
Because some of it got, it's
lots of congestion there.
Yeah, it's not one way you've got a lot of stuff spread out. You've got big lines, and it's trying to break through those.
Yeah.
But what's something that you enjoyed about playing Demyansk Shield?
Quite a lot. I think the production is really good. The player aid charts are very well done, nicely put together. After using them for a couple of rounds, I think we were like, oh, okay, I get it, understand that. I really enjoyed the stacking limit uses a pip system. So some units have 1 pip, some units have 2. An interesting thing, and maybe we'll talk about this when we get a close-up, one of my larger units that I actually just received in this round had 6 pips. And why that's important is you can only stack 7 pips in 1 hex. So for most of my units, I could have about 3 units, sometimes 4. Alexander could have 3 to 4 units.
Yeah.
But my bigger units were bigger, probably less trained, command and control concerns and issues. So I like that. I like that pip system. I don't know that we've played too many. It's usually units, a number of units that can stack.
Or you'll have limits based on, in tactical games, it's X amount of leg units and 2 vehicles.
Right.
Or
a support unit or something.
Or it's games where you can have 3 companies if you're playing a company level game, and every unit's the same. Yeah. This game has a lot of different mixes. So your 6 pip unit, this is an entire brigade, whereas a lot of these are just divisions.
Right.
And there's some there's a lot of different stuff. So I think the pip system makes that really easy. You don't have to be like, oh, what size is this unit? You just look at the pips and it stacks.
Yeah, it made it kind of simplified.
Yeah.
In many ways. Also really liked the combat results table, or CRT. I thought it was good. There were a lot of very interesting versions of odds. Also, we could use support units like artillery or aircraft to come in and give those supports. There are some results on that CRT that eliminate those for that round. They kind of make them get damaged and they have to go home, or they run out of ammo, etc. I really liked that. I liked the support. You had way more than I did, but most of your support had to be used or only could be used in a city. So I tried to avoid combat in those cities, which I liked. So I liked that result, being able to even that battlefield a little bit. Those were a couple things that I liked.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the CRT is what makes this game stand out. You know, we've played a lot of war games with a lot of different combat results, and this one, I know Vance talked about this in your interview, that the odds columns are pretty unique, and there's some different, there's odds that you would normally see in a table which aren't there, and he took those out for very specific design reasons. But what you'll find is, if you're anywhere from 1 to 1, even 2 to 1, even beyond that, you've got 5 to 2 as a combat result column. If you're fighting within those, it's brutal for both sides. It's very hard.
Yeah, there's a lot of attrition.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
You have to get big stacks and surround hexes to start getting to the 6 to 1, 7 to 1 odds before you start being able to just crush people and not take any losses. And that's really hard to do, especially as the game progresses and your units get more spread out and you've got more places to defend or hold or take. So I enjoyed the CRT because it makes that support more important, because whoever's got the most support gets column shifts, which is, you know, can get you over that threshold to where the combat results are less bloody for you maybe. And that reminded me of Unconditional Surrender, where you'll have the allied support markers. It's very similar in that way. You can throw in these extra tokens. That gave me that feeling, which is a nice abstraction of a lot of stuff. All this complicated artillery fire, and you don't have the entire Luftwaffe to command, or the Soviet Air Force. It's just, here's a counter that gives me a +1. Can you counter that? Yes. All right, it's a zip, nothing. You know, it negates itself. You don't do any air combat or anything. It's just, you get a column shift if you have the most.
The rules kept saying, stop trying to shoot each other down. You're not going to shoot each other down. I thought that was funny. I also liked the untried units, which were the blue or gray, bluish gray German units. They were randomly distributed. I think there were 10 of them in this scenario. And you didn't know what you were going to get. It was kind of a mixed bag. While the setup specifically said you're going to use these numbers, that they weren't really powerful units. Some of them were decent. And it was just kind of a hidden element that I didn't know about when I attacked, so I had to think about that. Yeah. Even you didn't know about it. Really.
Yeah, when I'm attacking, I'm like,
oh, what's that number under there? Oh, it's a 1. So I thought that was kind of neat. I enjoy any game that can incorporate in some way some hidden information. It just keeps it interesting, keeps you off kilter a little bit. Holland 44 has something very similar to that. By GMT Games. I liked that hidden unit. What did they call that? Was that called?
They're called Untried.
Untried.
Because they're almost green units, so to speak. They're not. Yeah, they haven't been.
I thought that was cool. I liked that part.
Yeah, I enjoy. And anytime you've got hidden counters like that, where you just don't know, that's a very popular mechanic in solitaire games. So it gives me that little feel of like that unknown. And when that's on your team, you know, if you're there are units where you're like, hopefully these guys are okay. Let's go for it. That's really fun. I had a great time doing that.
Yeah.
But this game's got a lot of cool. So the rules are actually really, really simple.
Very simple.
Move. You've got zones of control, attack, defend. If you've played war games, this will be very, very familiar, very easy to pick up. So I'd recommend it from that standpoint. There's the little chrome like we talked about from the support markers and the different artilleries that you can have. But really, outside of that, there isn't a lot of like extra bits and pieces. There's cool mechanics about getting your reinforcement points to replace units and how each side does that as asymmetrical.
Or rebuild units that were eliminated.
But there's not like a ton of extra stuff to keep a track of. You know, there's weather, and the weather plays a huge part in this.
Right.
You know, if you've got you have frozen, which means you can just like drive your trucks over a swamp.
Or over rivers.
But if they're there and then it turns to like mud, they're stuck. They literally can't move and they're stuck in a swamp until hopefully the weather changes. Yeah. So you get some really cool stuff like that.
Right. And the tagline of this game is the Frozen Fortress. So it was in January, February, March, and April, and May of 42. So it's not like they had good weather.
No.
Right? It was either really, really cold and frozen or sloppy and muddy.
And
So
it's
yeah,
much
that's a very
more likely to be frozen than
It
not,
is.
based on the
based on the modifiers, and so that was kind of cool. It actually, I felt, advantaged the Germans in many ways because you could kind of move across rivers without worrying about trying to get to bridges.
Yeah, it wasn't as bad moving across rivers and things like that. You actually had some maneuverability.
Right.
But it made, suddenly a clear hex that you would expect to be just like, it's one movement in every other game. Well, when it's frozen, like a clear hex is a 2.
Yeah, right.
And you're like, oh my gosh, you've got to stick to the roads in that point.
Yeah.
And so then the fighting gets bloody on the roads, and that was the whole point of the scenario that we were playing, was creating a supply route to free up the kind of trapped pocket here.
Yeah.
And
We'll show you that here in a moment.
Some fascinating stuff goes on in this game.
I liked the ski units too. While I really couldn't figure out how to use them effectively, ski units are very maneuverable. They have an 8 movement, and they can actually retreat from combat with a roll. You have to roll a 3 or higher. So a 66% chance, and I retreated more often than I did.
They can retreat before combat, and then you can just move them back into counterattack because they have a very strong attack value. Not very good in defense.
Not good at defense. So that was a cool unit. I think I started to get an idea really of how to use them more effectively. The Katyusha rockets are pretty cool.
Having just it's ranged attack.
Range support, basically. That way it actually added to the attack value.
Yes.
Lots of neat elements in the game.
But yeah, so that's kind of, this game is fun to play. What we'll do is we'll take a look at the board so you can kind of see the components and what it looks like, because there's a lot here. So we'll show you that, and then we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So here's a look at the board, and this is kind of where we're at. The lighting might not be the greatest, but we're going to kind of get through it here. So we played scenario 2, which you play with just the western side of the board, and you start with all the German units already trapped around Demyansk, and you have a huge German force trying to cut through so that they can break out and kind of relieve these guys. And then, so the Russians have huge battle lines here and here, and all their reinforcements are going to come from the north and start penetrating and causing havoc if the Germans are able to kind of start getting across the map. So that's generally what this scenario is about. And what's cool about this game is you have these what are called Strongpoints, and these represent all different kinds of fortifications and trench lines and minefields and all that kind of stuff. So they just call them Strongpoints as kind of a generic term. And you've got a ring of them here around Demyansk, which is under the player aids, and then you've got a bunch of them up here, and these ones are not active, but you've got them in the larger city hexes. And what those do is provide you a big defensive bonus, which relates to a column shift for the defender. And that helps, so it helps these guys to survive the game so that they can be relieved. And that, those can be fairly daunting, because if you're attacking at even odds, which happens...
Which isn't a good idea in this game.
A terrible, terrible idea.
Really, if you look here at the 1-to-1, it is really not good for the attacker.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good. Yeah, it's very bad. So the strong points help these guys stay here, and I like it's really what happened. It was thematic, but the gameplay is really good in that way. It simulates what happened very, very well. What we'll do is I'll pick up a few different counters here and kind of see what's going on. But you can see the map. It's got great terrain. It's very, very clear, and the unit counters are also really, really cool. So we've got, this is a ski unit, got little skis on there. And he's got a 2 attack value, a 1 defense value, and he has this 8 movement factor. So the 8 movement factor is great. You can move really high or really far, but this 8, if you compare it to this one, it's got an 8 too. This one's got that white circle with the red. This means he can do a special kind of extra exploitation movement, but the white background instead of the red background on this one. He's got exploitation movement wherever he goes. The ski unit only has exploitation movement when it's frozen, so when it's like snow turns. And basically that means, he can move and do an attack, and if he does that, at the end of that player's turn, he'd be marked with an exploitation movement marker. He can move half his movement again. So you can move an attack as like a prodding force, and you can kind of skip around. So you can do some really cool stuff with your armor units to kind of push people back and then circle around and cut them off. Or it's great for like punching through holes and flanking. So there's some really neat elements, but it's not too much. Like most units in the game don't have that kind of stuff. Most units are fairly bog standard, and this is one of those. These are the untried ones. So it's blank, you have no idea what it is. You just shuffle these up at the beginning and put them out where it tells you to. And then if you attack or you get attacked, you flip it and hope for the best. Boom, I got a 126.
I really like that.
126, yeah, I think that's really, really cool. And so this guy was, 236. He was much, much better than the other guy. But I had one that was like a 0. And I think he was an engineer's unit, but you're like...
And I was okay when that guy came up.
Yeah, you're like hoping to have a good combat unit, and he's like trash. And so there's some just really cool bits and pieces in there. But outside of that, you have really, really neat, just kind of normal war game. You don't have... we didn't spend an age pouring through the rule book trying to learn a whole new concept.
I think the rule book's 20 pages, right?
Yeah.
20 pages.
And then like 2 pages of that are scenarios, and there's also an extended example of play.
So it's like 16 or 17 pages
Yeah.
of rules.
And there's some great designer notes in there from Class of Warriors as well. He did a really good job of that. But really, a lot of the game it's odds-based combat. So let's see if this is an attack I would even attempt. It's not. So this guy's got 8 attack value, 4 and 4, and this guy's got a 6 and a 3 defense value, is a 9. Is an attack I would not recommend doing. And you basically just look at the chart here. It's basically 1-to-1, and then you attempt to use any of these support markers. If you have any artillery that's in range, obviously I can't find one. So this guy's an artillery unit. He has a range of 4, which is this little white box here. If he was in range, you could, the German players could say, okay, I'm going to commit my artillery, and maybe I'm also going to throw in my Stuka, who's got a 2 support value. So I've got a 5 support value altogether, and he's going to do that in reaction to whatever the Soviet player is doing, or the Soviet player is sending 2 of his.
Which aren't as good as your Stukas.
No, they are not as good. And so what you end up with is, I had 5, he had 2. There's an extra combat support chart that you check. The attacker, for example, had the advantage of like, if you have an advantage by 1, 2, or 3, you get a certain amount of column shifts. So suddenly your 1-to-1 odds that you had might go to a 3-to-2 or a 2-to-1, or like inversely, they might go down, be even worse. If you end up attacking on a 1-to-2, you kind of get surprised. There's really heavy resistance, very, very bad. But combat, roll a d6, consult the CRT. It's very, very simple in that way. But the CRT itself is where a lot of the beauty of the game is.
Well, and I wanted to point out, if you can look here at the 1-to-1 column, why I said an even attack is really so bad for the attacker is if you look at the results, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 results on a d6 that are not good for the attacker. This A asterisk is not a reduction or a retreat, but you're going to be forced to lose all the units in one of your support groups, either your artillery or your aircraft.
And so those would get flipped. You would say, I'm going to lose my artillery. Boom, he's now fired. He can't go
for the rest of the turn, he's done. And you can see there are actually, if you're the Soviets, there are 3 of those examples when you're attacking. So a botched attack or a bad attack really doesn't ever go well. I think that has to do with the winter, right? The conditions and the weather. It was harder to attack. It was harder to get good footing. It was harder to dig in. It was harder to get prepared. So that's why a 1-to-1 is bad. And I'm going to tell you, Alexander, we had a lot of 5-to-2s.
A lot of 5-to-2, and I rolled historically badly on those.
You rolled 5s and 6s quite a few times as the attacker, and rolled quite a few 1s. And I thought, wow, those are bad columns. They really are. The columns don't really get good, I don't think, until you're above 3-to-1. After that, even then it's not great, but there are better results when you're above 3-to-1, which you were getting quite often.
Right, and that's early game. You'll do that because you have larger stacks that are more organized. As things start to spread out,
we were starting to get closer. You were struggling to get 2-to-1, which I was like, yeah, finally.
But if you don't, these 4-1 plus, these gray results are all, it's all bad for the defender. It's much better for the attacker, and you're starting to force people to retreat very quickly. They have to go back 2 hexes instead of 1. So there's a lot of cool stuff in this, but really this band here in the middle that goes all the way diagonally, it's just a bloodbath for both sides. If based on poor rolls and just like middling combat odds, the game is brutal.
And for the Russians, the Soviets, you kept losing 2 reductions, and I would lose 1. I was okay with that.
Yes, and I thought this is just a really well put together CRT.
I think I'd also like to have people's comments on that, because I don't know that we've seen one exactly like this. We maybe have and are just forgetting, but it's very interesting.
This unique. I've never seen 5-2 on a card combat table.
Pretty rare.
And Vance talked about that again in your interview, and I thought it was really cool the way that he just made it very unique in that way.
Yeah.
And that to me is what makes this game.
Right.
Is the combat. Obviously, we play Wargames for the combat and the tactics. Extremely. This is great strategy in this game.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, you have to create your attacks. You have to create everything. I don't feel like the game is necessarily scripted in how you do what you're supposed to do. Obviously, the situation that you're put in means that certain things have to happen, but how you go about doing that is entirely up to you.
So let's talk a little bit about the lines. As you can see, this was near the end of our middle to end of our game. You can see that the Russians were holding both lines pretty well. The Germans were going to be able to eventually punch through in the north-west by Staraya, Russia, and put pressure on the Russians that way. And what they were trying to do was link up with this group and create a supply chain going back to the left side of the board. So I kept saying to myself, I've got to make sure I have units to end up cutting that supply line. And I can see I've got good units in the middle of the board ready to pounce and ready to move in support to kind of cut those lines. And that's something I was trying to do as a Soviet player. You were obviously trying to crush me and get across that river. So really interesting. I think this is a fantastic game. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, and the other thing I thought was cool is the reinforcement schedule. So the Russians just keep getting all these reinforcements that keep pouring in from the north. The Germans, on the other hand, get very few reinforcements. And then later on in the game, they start losing their air support. The air support just goes, you just lose. One of the Junkers 88s goes away, and then your Stukas go away. Because they are, they're effectively destroyed, or they're just like kind of run down. And I thought that was really neat, just the extra elements of the history in this game. And I believe that this game has a particular place in Vance von Borry's heart because, and we're going to dig it out here. One of these counters, did I pick it up already?
Is the von Borries unit.
This is the von Borries unit here. So we'd showcase that. I know that that's part of the reason that he wanted to make a game on this. And this is an excellent game. I had a blast playing this.
Me too.
So what we'll do is we'll wrap up for some final thoughts. So that was a look at the board and kind of how all the mechanics work and what you can expect to see on at least the scenario that we played. What are maybe some things that you didn't like as much about the game?
The one thing I think I made a comment about was the river crossings or attacking across rivers. If you had only one unit attacking across that river, there was a column shift in your favor as the defender. But if you had 2 or 3 units attacking from different parts, and only one of those units was not attacking across a river, you lost that defensive bonus. I don't understand that. In my opinion, that doesn't necessarily compute. I'm sure somebody could provide a reason why that is. That kind of bothered me, and it only bothered me because every other East Front game we've played, you use those as the Russians. Those rivers are used to kind of be a screen, kind of a defensive screen to prevent huge attacks. So that was interesting. I don't know that I didn't like it. That's probably an improper statement, but I'd like to better understand that.
Yeah.
From a historical and a terrain or geographical. One time you attacked me with 4 stacks, I believe. So one of his stacks was not across the river, the other 3 were. And you said, well, 25% of my forces weren't across the river, but I'm like 75% of your attack power was.
Yeah.
So why didn't I get that column shift? And in the end, it wouldn't have made a huge difference. I was going to get crushed in that instance, no matter what.
But I would like to hear some input about that. 'Cause
I would.
You could argue that's because of the sheer level of the game, where maybe
Right.
or maybe it's just purely a balance thing from
Yeah.
playtesting. But I'd love to hear some input about that.
And another thing about the terrain, the woods didn't affect the Soviets, which I thought was very, very interesting.
Yeah.
It also didn't hinder movement. It also didn't provide any cover, which typically in woods
So it
you're
didn't
going to
do
gain.
anything for you. It hindered my movement,
Right, it hindered your movement.
but that was it.
Yeah, but it didn't offer a protection. I thought, oh, that's different. I would also
Yeah.
like to know some comments. Can you think of a lot of other war games where woods or forest or jungle don't offer any kind of protection?
And that was cool that was asymmetric, though.
It
'Cause you
is.
You can just waltz
Yeah.
through. Yeah, this is up.
Yeah, actually, after I
And
realized
was like,
that,
crawling through.
yeah,
It was much
after I
harder for me to
realized
do
that, I thought, oh, I should really use that to my advantage.
Yeah.
I should fall back and use that, and I started doing that. So yeah, that was kind of cool. But I would like to know, does someone else have any other ideas on
absolutely.
that?
So for me, the game is extremely long. It is a very long game.
Yes.
If you play this start to finish, each turn, each player has 2 different operations phases. So you can move all your units 2 different times and attack twice. There's a lot of stuff to do, and the game can be as big or as little as you want. There are a couple of smaller scenarios. We played scenario 2, which is 7 turns, and this it can do like 18 turns. I mean, you could play
Yeah,
this
so
game
18
for
turns
hours.
would literally be 72 activations, right? 2 activations per round per player.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yes.
That is a lot.
It's a big game in a small box, and it's
Yeah.
but the game itself is great. The gameplay is fairly fast paced considering what it is.
Agreed.
You got to count some stacks and do that kind of stuff, but you do some odds, roll on a table, boom, attack's done. You either move, retreat, or it's very very familiar rule set. So you could get through it, but this is a long game. You can play this for quite a healthy amount of time. That's the only thing. Just be warned. You can play this for a long time.
Right. But other than that, I enjoyed this.
Yeah, had a blast.
We played for several hours. Took a while to get set up and kind of go over the rules, but I enjoyed it. It was fun. Even though I played the Russians, I typically always play the Russians in these East Front games. I don't know why that is. But I felt like even though I was getting my butt kicked and having to fall back, I felt like I had some good strategic choices to do that. Mostly to plan how to counterattack, and I liked that. So kudos to that. Love the support part of the game, the artillery and the air power. Thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
The map is great. Actually, for an East Front game, this is a really cool map. Very colorful.
Yes, which is nice.
Really neat colors, vibrant, stands out. The counters were great. When we ripped them out of the sprues, some of them were really being hurt or defaced. Once we clipped them,
They're great.
they're great. Great counters. They look great. They work great. They function well. I think bravo. I think this is a good game.
Yeah, I had a blast playing this. Like I said, there's a lot of game in here. I mean, we did just one scenario. There's twice as many counters in the box. So this thing can be as big as you want it to be. But a unique game in the subject matter, I don't know if this has been gamed at all specifically.
If it has, very little.
Here in the, is it the Valaday Hills? I think is what it's called. Fighting around Demyansk. But I would highly recommend this game. It's a good old-fashioned hex and counter war game. Got some traditional rules in there, combat results, odds-based combat, but some great little neat, new, fresh elements to keep it new, as well as the subject matter. So that's been Demyansk Shield from Legion Wargames, and we've been theplayersaid.com.
Thank you.